Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and I spoke with magazine writer Sophie Elmhirst.
We talked about her journey in, out and back into journalism, her move into long-form features and the freedoms of freelance journalism.
It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome, Sophie, to Always Take Notes. To start, could you tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you got into writing, what made you want to become a writer?
Sure. I guess I was definitely one of those people at university who had no idea what I was going to do, and was also one of those people in my early 20s that sort of tried out about 8 different careers, it felt like at the time. I remember graduating and I was sort of simultaneously, tutoring kids, and I would think I was an assistant to a writer for a bit, a job I found at the back of the LRB.
What had you studied at university?
English, yeah. And I had done a bit of like school journalism. Like, I think I worked on the sort of school paper, but I didn't do anything at university at all, and had very little intention to go into that world. But one of the kind of multiple jobs I was doing simultaneously was an internship at Prospect magazine, which was my kind of first job out of uni. And that was an internship that became a very part-time job. So I was still doing all the other stuff at the same time. And that led me, I guess, to applying again. I did a lot of like looking up. It was like really showing my age because it was back in the day when there was like a media section of The Guardian, which you would like leaf through on paper and like circle possible jobs. And I remember finding then an advert for a job as an editorial assistant at a sort of new publication they were bringing out in The Guardian called Public magazine, which I don't think lasted very long. And I got that job. And so that was the sort of like, there were the beginnings of it, but there was never a plan. And as I say, like simultaneously to those early jobs, I was like applying for law school, thinking I was going to be a speech therapist, auditioned for drama school. I mean, like, it was a messy time, basically.
And were those early jobs the kind of classic intern making tea?
Yeah,
stuff?
Definitely. I guess I was just keen to earn early, so I was sort of doing a lot of jobs that were kind of money jobs, and then the only internship I really did, I think, at post uni was for Prospect, which I was lucky enough did sort of turn into an actual kind of paid job.
And had you come from London originally? Yeah.
So again, I was lucky, and I could live with my mum, who was still living in London, so that helped in terms of doing an internship. So I did. Yeah, I grew up in London.
And for your job at the publication at The Guardian, what sort of things were you doing?
It was your kind of absolute like classic editorial assistant job, which was basically everything from like, I remember like managing newsletters to dealing with subscribers to arranging stuff for other people or freelancers who were working on the magazine, like going through the whole production schedule. And then, but it was like my first chance to write a little bit in print. So I never did any writing when I was at Prospect. That was just like a sort of very much a kind of fact-checking administrative role. But I was given a chance to start doing some little interviews and some pieces, and got a kind of taste for it, I guess, then. Although saying that, shortly after that, I had a kind of like total sort of moral questioning and decided journalism was a terrible idea, and I went and worked for an NGO for 4 years. So it's been like a really wayward journey to actually what I'm doing now.
Could you talk us through the ways of the way, as it were? I mean, so how we invited you on for these because we read these amazing magazine pieces that you're known for now. But your path from this early editorial assistant job through NGOs. Could you just talk us through your journey?
Sure. Oh God, I wish there was a sort of coherent narrative, and even in retrospect, it's really hard to attach a coherent narrative to it, even though that would be neat and helpful. But actually, I was sort of thinking about this and thinking, well, maybe it's nice for people to know that there doesn't have to be a coherent narrative, and that like years can pass in sort of professional chaos and waywardness, and actually it kind of can turn out okay in the end, even though I would say, like maybe that waywardness is sort of something that's with you for life if you've had it for a while. I mean the switch from working in magazines to going to work for an NGO was just simply because I just had a sort of thought that it wasn't like I wasn't doing good in the world, basically, by working in magazines. And I think, I was 23 or 4 at the time, and maybe then I had sort of more idealistic ideas about what one's function should or could be in the world. So I went and worked for Save the Children, and I was in their press office. And I don't think I was a very good press officer. And then I worked in their sort of policy team, doing kind of communication stuff and writing reports, which I actually really loved, because you actually got to go deep into stuff and talk to all the experts. I was the sort of link person, I guess, for a while between these people who had spent years out in different countries and knew everything there was to know about malnutrition or like child protection or all sorts of things, and so that I learned a huge amount, and thought at that point, after a while of doing that I would go and do a master's. I remember I got a place to do a master's. I quit my job, got a place to do a master's in global politics, at the LSE. And then turned up on the first day and bought some textbooks and sat in a lecture and realised I understood sort of very little of what was going on, and tried to look at the textbooks and realised it was all entirely theoretical, and was just like, oh, shoot, no, I want to be a journalist again. Like, I'm not an academic. This is so not me. And actually, there was a kind of key moment which made me turn back to journalism, which was I entered, just as I was leaving Save the Children, I entered a competition. I don't know if they run it anymore. I haven't seen it advertised, but it was a competition run by The Guardian, actually, for sort of freelance young journalists or student journalists. I think they had 2 categories, young journalists and student journalists, and it was in collaboration with loads of NGOs. And it was a sort of wonderful idea, because basically what it offered to you as a young or aspiring journalist was a chance to go on a reporting trip, so somewhere really far-flung, hosted by an NGO, so taken there with them, and given a kind of specific subject that they obviously wanted to have highlighted in The Guardian, and your opportunity, what you won was just the opportunity to do that, which was amazing. It was amazing, and I got to go to Bangladesh and India and write about, I was with Mary Stopes, so I was writing about like reproductive rights basically in those countries, and it was just, I found it electrifying, I guess, just the sort of chance to be overseas and traveling and reporting and talking to people and having that sort of way into an issue and a place, and that kind of cemented, I guess, the idea of actually trying to do that long term.
Did you win the competition?
No. No. I got the chance to go, and then I think there was like a sort of final winner. I remember going to a ceremony, and I definitely wasn't the final winner. But
is this it's the International Development Journalism Competition?
Yes,
I did it.
Oh, you did it. Oh, right. Okay. Well, you know.
Yeah, I remember the deal. I went to Uganda. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I just think it just came for me at a really good time, because I guess it perfectly straddled the two sort of worlds, I guess, in that I was very familiar with that NGO world, but I'd always felt quite uncomfortable with my roles within it, and then traveling in the capacity, through the lens of being a journalist, I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like, this is the mode in which I'm comfortable, I guess. And
then after that, how did your rise to power continue?
My rise to power.
That's Simon's favourite phrase. That, along with, how much are you paid? It was very much not a rise to power, because shortly after that I quit this master's, and once again had absolutely no idea what I was doing with my life, and so then just found myself essentially unemployed. So I had to kind of start again. I think this was, it's one of those things where adversity teaches you a lot. I had to move back in with my mum for a bit, and I had to write a lot of letters and emails, and just started like getting in touch with lots and lots of people and applying to anything I could. I remember getting down to the last 2 for a job at Chatham House it was like an assistant editor job for a publication they had, and I didn't get it, and just thinking, okay, well, I'm really screwed now. And then I guess next key thing, which I am forever grateful for, was and I did get a few replies from editors, to be fair to them, but the only person who was like, oh, come and meet me, was Jason Cowley, who's the editor of the New Statesman. And I went to meet him and pitched him some ideas, and he took one and published it. and that felt like a massive deal at the time for me. And he then was like, oh, look, there's a couple of jobs opening up, you should apply. And they were like graduate trainee jobs. And by that stage, I think I was like 27. And so it was like, okay, yeah, well, I'll go for the graduate trainee job because I haven't got many options right now. And I got it. And I ended up being there for sort of 4 or 5 years until I went freelance when I had my first kid.
So when you joined as a trainee, was that mostly writing, or was it a mix of stuff?
No, I mean, I think I like boldly went in thinking, I'll turn this into mostly writing. But no, I had absolutely not. Like from day one, I think he was always giving me opportunities to write, and that was fantastic. But no, it was a job, and like it was very much working on the magazine. It was a small staff. It was working on all aspects. It was editing, commissioning. And I sort of gradually did more and more. I sort of ended up being the features editor. I mean, it was a very small team, so this wasn't a kind of like rising through many, many ranks. But it was very much an editorial job. It's like, a weekly magazine, so with a small staff, so it's quite an intense workflow. Sorry.
I was going to say all hands on deck.
Oh, right.
I didn't have the microphone, so I did gesturing.
I've lost my flow. Yes, the New Statesman. I mean, that's also where I first wrote magazine pieces for. And I think a lot of people, it provided that kind of first window on. We had Helen Lewis on the show as well when she was deputy editor. I think I think if I was summarising kind of where that's at in my experience, and maybe for other people, it's like a fantastic place in that it gives young people this opportunity to write at length and scale, and has this huge kind of literary heritage, but that it doesn't have the resources to kind of pay people very much for this kind of thing and to fund travel and stuff like that. So it's kind of fantastically useful stepping stone, but kind of wanted to move through it. How did you feel? Is that fair? Do you think from having been on the inside of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess I have, sort of different. When I feel like I was on the inside of it, I was on the inside of it as an editor and as a commissioner. So I was at that point, I was really dealing with lots of writers, and there's no doubt we weren't able to pay people as much as other places, and there were sort of restrictions on that. But at the same time, and I think they still do this. I think what we were able to do was give a space for like really great writers to maybe write things they wouldn't otherwise find homes for, and to write original and quite essayistic pieces and write at length. And those big kind of, it's hard to find anywhere in a way that can fund the kind of big reported travel based sort of pieces. But they definitely weren't, and I presume still aren't in a position to do that. But I feel like they just have a kind of a breadth and an open-mindedness to what they will publish and are interested in publishing, which I always found. I suppose what I'm trying to say is I was always surprised by the and delighted by the kind of caliber of writers I could ask. Like Rachel Cusk, I remember, wrote a couple of pieces for me while I was there, and I don't know, all sorts of people, Rowan Williams, all these amazing writers basically and thinkers who would just regularly pitch up and write a piece in the New Statesman. And I think that was often because there was a sense that they could write something there that, would maybe not find a home elsewhere.
How did you find being on the editing and commissioning side of things?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it was my sort of natural home in a way. Like, I'm really, really glad I did it. I think it's an amazing sort of training as a writer to be an editor. Some rare and brilliant people can do both equally well. I think I'm a better writer than I am an editor, but it taught me a huge amount. It taught me about. I think it's made me less precious a writer. I think it's made me really sympathetic to the position editors are in.
There's a kind of value in being on the other side of the fence,
definitely.
Right? And having seen that.
Yeah, definitely. I also think there's a real value, again, like going back to the kind of wayward career thing, of having, as a writer and a reporter now, where you're always sort of on the outside of stuff, is like having been inside buildings, like having been on the inside of institutions, having been on the inside of meetings that or discussions or or events where, journalists wouldn't be allowed in because all sorts of stuff's going down or whatever. There's that sense of like a knowledge of and a kind of experiential knowledge of being on the inside, which I think is actually really valuable once you're forever on the outside as a reporter.
And with the work that you do now is very reported. It's kind of based very much on that. When you were in the Statesman, how much did you feel that the politics of the place was kind of shaping the stuff you were commissioning, or how was that line walked?
Yeah, I mean, I guess not really by me, in that I just am not and was not like driven by a sort of political fervour, I guess. And other people, there were plenty of other people who really did that and were more engaged in that. And I think I was always more on the kind of cultural sort of, I'd worked on the back half for a while as the deputy to Jonathan Derbyshire, who was the culture editor at the time. And then when I was doing features, it was very much like other people would commission the sort of heavy politics stuff, and I was very much like hoping and trying to bring in the kind of weird esoteric kind of, I don't know, more literary writing, I suppose. So I think I avoided it, essentially. And I think I still slightly do, which probably sounds cowardly, but I guess I'm just more interested in I'm interested in how politics creeps into things and creeps into everything, and I don't avoid it as a subject, I think, but it's never like the main motivating subject, I guess.
So when did you leave the New Statesman?
I left when I was like 9 months pregnant with my first baby, when I was going on maternity leave, so that was 2013.
Okay,
yeah.
So
and I've been freelance since then.
You've done the mantelpiece then while you were at the...
Yeah, so I did get to do some writing, some like, more long form, and like really my first attempt at anything approaching kind of long form while I was there, but mostly in my, almost always in my own time. So the deal kind of was that you could write and you could get given space, but you had to find your own time to do it. Like, it couldn't interfere with your job.
Can you take us through the process of that mantelpiece, which I think is really good? I was really struck by it. From the gestation of the idea to the negotiation with Access, then the reporting. How did you kind of feel your way? If this was sort of one of the first big pieces you did, how did you go about doing it?
Yeah, I think it was sort of chancy, really, in that for a while, I'd done a few sort of. I knew I wanted to start writing longer pieces and long form, and I was like a fan of long form, back when it was sort of, I guess, less of an established thing, at least in this country. And I knew I wanted to try my hand, and I felt like, given the restrictions on traveling and reporting all the thing, that profiles was the obvious like way to do that, because we were interviewing people all the time for the magazine, and I sort of thought with a bit of like stretching of the Access, you could probably get enough material to do a proper profile. I'd done a couple, but they were kind of sort of falling a bit short, I think. And then with her, I did, what happens all the time in these sort of publicity schedules or whatever. I had a hour-long interview schedule with her in a London hotel, which I did. And obviously any conversation that Hilary Mantel has with anyone is a brilliant conversation. But I came away from the conversation thinking, oh my God, there's just so much more there and so much of a story to tell. And it felt like such a moment that was approaching it was sort of timed, I think, around the approach of the second Booker Prize, which she ended up winning, and that was sort of like a sort of historical moment in itself. So that there was, timing of these things is always really key, and I just thought, well, it's worth trying. So I just emailed her. I don't know how I got her email. Maybe we just had it at the magazine. I emailed her just saying, look, I really love talking to you, and can I come and see you in Devon? And she said yes. And so, I mean, in a way, if I look back on it now, it feels... And then obviously I did like other interviews and reporting. I did other interviews around that. I went to meet her agent. I spoke to her editor at the LLB. Had a bunch of conversations. When I think about it now, like, the reporting was pretty light. It was like one lunchtime sort of encounter style interview and one day trip to Devon and a bunch of other conversations. But I guess what doing that piece taught me was that you could, sometimes the challenge is like trying to make something out of not necessarily like that much, or at least with just what you've got or what you can get, and that's what I got. And so I guess that was like my first attempt to sort of try and structurally and stylistically do something a little bit bolder than just a kind of straight written through interview. Yeah.
And did you, because the piece is quite literary in itself, was that something you wanted to do from the beginning, because she's obviously a a writer of literature, etc.?
I guess so. I sort of have this weird, I don't know, I've never really articulated this before, and this might sound just either really pretentious or just wrong, but I have some kind of faith in the idea or theory that pieces often end up, even if it's not the intention, sort of in some way reflecting or being on the same terms as their subject. So, or maybe it's just like a sort of ventriloquism thing where you kind of end up like a slightly like mimicking the kind of tone
like when
of
you
the
talk
subject.
back to the tampon chatbot.
Yeah, I guess I don't. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just
But
like
we'll come to that in due course.
We'll come back to the chatbot. I don't know quite what I'm trying to say, but I think it's like I do really like writing in really different styles and tones. I like writing seriously. I like writing very unseriously, and I'm drawn to really, really different kind of subjects. And with her, it just sort of, maybe it was some sort of deference to, or like just, you know, lame fangirl mimicry of a kind of literary style. But I sort of felt right for her, I guess.
I also thought what you were saying about, you know, you said you think in retrospect the reporting was relatively light, but just that kind of conceptual difference from, as you say, doing the sit down in a hotel room with someone to actually saying, I want access within your place, I want to talk to other people. You know, I think particularly in this country, that's quite a big conceptual leap, right? I mean, it's interesting, we interviewed Giles Hadsley at Vogue about this, and we were saying, you know, do you do that? You'll write like the Vogue cover, but it'll be entirely based just on a sit down, or you attempted to make that, and he didn't. And I think, you know, that adds a tremendous amount of richness, even if it's only 2 other phone calls or something, because suddenly you have the view in the round. But what was there a kind of, were you reading things where you were seeing this, or what was prompting you to stretch your legs a bit in that direction?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely always like reading a ton of stuff, and, you know, reading all the obvious stuff, I guess, and you know, you read a New Yorker profile and it's like, oh, okay, so it's like, you know, it's a theory of a person. Actually, I think that's Jonathan Shainin, I know you've had on as well. Like his, I always remember him saying to me that his like sense of what a profile was, a good profile was like you have like a theory of a person, and so I'm stealing that from him. But you know, it should be so much more, and I think, I don't know, a lot of all this I think is confidence. You know, you can. And it took me a really, really long time to get that, like to have the confidence to sort of write in a way that you could, I guess, slightly perform that trick, or like, you know, do that conversion from something which, in its bare bones, could have still been quite limited. But you know, I suppose it's that sort of idea that you back yourself to kind of write in your own voice a bit more, and to sort of state things and to have a theory, you know, which I think, it took me a long time to have the kind of guts, I guess, to even try and do that.
I mean, something I found when writing profiles is like the concern that I would not find anything interesting to say about that person, or find anything new to say.
Right? Yeah.
Was that something with Hilary Mantel about which a huge amount has been written?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if I achieved that. I mean, you know, she's like an interview machine, that woman. I mean, anytime you read anything with her, she just comes out with gold. And so, in a way, you know, like someone like that makes your job easier. But it's definitely, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I don't know. I guess I have some sort of weird faith in the moment of an interview that if you go on long enough, and if you're just bold enough, you can try and get to places just a bit beyond maybe where they've been before. And that sounds like I'm a really kind of like swashbuckling interviewer. I'm not at all. So bold isn't the right word, but it's more about like pushing a conversation to its limits, I suppose. And I guess there's like just having the sort of I don't know, perseverance, or just the time to do that.
What was the edit process like for that? Because you were the features editor.
Yeah,
when it ran.
Obviously I wasn't just like, well, this is perfect. No, I didn't edit it. So I think Helen was by then the deputy editor, I think, or at least I can't remember. But she edited it, and Jason edited it, and yeah, so they both looked at it. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your interview process? Do you plan extensively what you're going to ask beforehand? Is it a mix of knowing what you want to ask and then doing some of it on the fly? Is it all on the fly?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like this has changed. My answer to this has changed over the years, in that I think I used to plan a lot more, and now I do it a lot more on the fly. That's the sort of short answer, I guess. And on the fly is slightly misrepresentative, and obviously I prep and do the reading and do a lot of research. But I think I suppose have more faith or confidence again in the idea that I can kind of steer a conversation, you know, in a way that is going to be sort of advantageous to the piece, but also that the best conversations often come not from a plan, but from you actually just like listening in the moment to what someone's saying and responding to what they're saying. That sounds really, really obvious, but I think for quite a long time, or in early years, it's, you know, of doing it, I was definitely like quite wedded to questions, or wedded to that sort of sense of like, have I covered everything? And getting away from that, and also realizing that you can, I sort of always end every interview being like, it's okay if I come back to you, right? Like when I'm writing this up, or, you know, and it never just being one conversation. Ideally, it's being 2 or 3 or 4 or however many. So, yeah, I suppose I feel like now it's more organic, and that seems to work.
So I was going to ask as well, with the Alexa piece for 1843.
Oh, yeah.
Where you had to inhabit someone's kind of voice.
Yeah.
How many interviews did you do for that? How much time did you spend with your subject?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, that was fun. She was a real trooper and really let me sort of tag along for a while. So I guess it would be like hours at a time where we just hang out in her flat. Or
were you at that party where the people smoke on the balcony?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. So going to a birthday party at her flat, hanging out with her friends, with her boyfriend, going to another party I went to with her.
But you weren't in Dorset, or were you in Dorset?
I was not in Dorset. No, I was not in Dorset. That was, my reporting of Dorset was purely based on her social media content. Okay. I mean, God, that was just, I don't know, so much of that is like that kind of process where you really do need the emotion, is just getting lucky with a subject. And that, you know, it took me a while to find. I mean, God, I have real memories of like, basically it was the magazine's idea, and they wanted like a profile of a millennial, and I remember
we should say this is a bit later. This is well past your...
Yes, sorry, this is like a couple of years ago, I guess. Now, yeah, so it is, yeah, exactly. But they asked me to do this, and I remember just biking around London fields, like accosting people that looked sort of vaguely in the age bracket, or kind of like they represented some of the stereotypes I had in my mind of what a millennial was, and just sort of asking them. Anyway, that was sort of the low point of the reporting process, and then I eventually kind of just found someone who was up for it and then wasn't up for it, but recommended me someone else who they thought would be really up for it and really good.
So they weren't like a relative of an editor at the magazine? Or
no, God, no. They were totally... no. It was a sort of connection of a connection of a connection of someone I just found on the internet, basically. So, it was that. I mean, that's. I feel like it's maybe the side of things which is not sort of spoken about enough, is like that the writing is such a sort of fractional part of this whole process, and that you just spend like 90% of your time desperately trying to get stuff off the ground and like find subjects and make them talk to you and get access to places or people. And, you know, people obviously do talk about this, but like it's worth emphasizing that is like a lot of the job.
This episode of Always Take Notes is supported by Clean Prose, London's first co-working space designed specifically for writers.
Based over 3 stories in Shoreditch in the east of the city, Clean Prose's mission is to provide writers of all stripes, from novelists to playwrights, with a space and a community designed especially for them.
To foster strong connections, Clean Prose offers a professional network that many writers miss when they work alone at home, at a library, or in a noisy cafe.
The ground floor is an event space, offering workshops, talks from experts, and book launches.
The first floor is an open-plan common room. It is the space for writers to connect, collaborate, drink coffee, and develop their professional networks within the publishing, TV, film, and other creative industries.
The second floor is a totally quiet space in which to concentrate and write, with private desks, lockers, and an extensive book collection.
To find out more, go to cleanprose.co.uk. Always Take Notes listeners are eligible for a 5-day pass to Clean Prose. To redeem this offer, please email write@cleanprose.co.uk with the subject line ATN-Welcome 5. Do you have any particular tips or tricks for getting people to open up to you or speak to you?
I find that like real open and frank honesty really helps and works. I think I used to be really cautious and used to be really like worried about like my sort of almost like my moral status as a journalist, and like feeling like, oh God, they must just think I'm awful, and like I'm, you know, and it's, I don't know, sort of caveating everything or being worried about, you know, how people would respond. And now I'm just really, I don't know, sort of lay it all quite bare, I guess. And I think
there's a lot to be said for that.
I
just
think
like,
so.
you know, be very upfront. Like,
I think so.
Explain how things work.
Yeah.
So I wonder, could you just talk, before we get into the nitty gritty of some of these more recent pieces, of how, you know, your freelance journey kind of...
Yeah, sure.
Journey, we shouldn't call it journey. Freelance
I'm
career. You know, how did that develop in the time that you... And you went freelance because you were having a baby, or how did those two things interface?
Yeah, good question. I think I'd wanted to go freelance for ages and never had the guts for lots of reasons, because it's a scary thing to do. And basically, it was almost like having a baby was my disguise for going freelance, or like that was my kind of way I could like slip out of the building unnoticed and not go back. And at the same time, like, and I want to make this point, like that it became really clear to me early on in motherhood, I guess, that I didn't want to go back to a full-time office job. And I obviously do not judge anyone that runs back to an office job as quickly as they can after having a baby. But for whatever reason, I just sort of thought, you know what, I kind of, if I can like forge a career, you know, I didn't want to stop working for a second, but if I can forge a career that means I can be around a bit more and at home a bit more, then I'd like to. So that was like, what was very incentivizing as well as being a kind of good disguise. So I mean, what it also meant was that I got going really early, and that I remember when my first kid was 6 weeks old, I went to interview Keira Knightley in a stately home with my mum in tow, and was sort of like breastfeeding either side of the interview. And actually, Keira Knightley was really down with it and really cool about it. So she was a good person, but like for such a sort of weird experiment. And actually, I've had a few things like that now over the years, where like the kids have, I don't know, one or other has had to come along, or like I've been doing phono interviews, like while taking someone to swimming, or, you know, that kind of thing. It just, in a way, I mean, there's an absurdity to it, but there's also like an absolute gift and great fortune to it, which is that I think being a freelance journalist is one of the things you can do while having kids. And it's hard at times, like really hard practically, but it's also is possible. And there are a lot of jobs that, you know, it's a bit more all or nothing. You can't like have that kind of middle ground. And so I feel very grateful for that in lots of ways. Yes.
Do you work mostly from home itself? Do you have somewhere in your house where you work?
Yeah, now more so. I used to, so my husband and I both do the same job. We're both freelance journalists, and for many years we were just like your classic roving cafe / library freelancers. And then whoever we could corral to like look after one of our kids was at home with the kid. So one of our parents, or for a little while we had a kind of childminder. But now they are at school and at nursery. There are two of them. And so the home has been slightly reclaimed, which is good. Yeah, it sort of feels like a kind of maturing of the freelance life somehow.
And how does your work now, in terms of how many clients you have and how many pieces you have ongoing at one stage, and how much of your work are you pitching and how much is editors coming to you, the kind of real, the mechanics of it?
Yeah, sure. So for the last couple of years, I've been on contract at The Guardian. So I'm for the long read desk. So I started writing for them when that was another kind of really happy moment in my career, in my journey, which was when Jonathan Janin turned up in London and got in touch, and he'd read the Hilary Mantel piece, and that was the only reason he got in touch with me. Like, I think that was the only piece he'd read, and was like, do you want to, setting up this thing called The Long Read, do you want to
write for it. And I was like, yes, please. And so I started writing for them then, and then went on contract with them. So I do 3 pieces a year for them, or at least that's what I'm contracted to do. And then I also write for 1843 magazine, which is the Economist sort of bi-monthly lifestyle kind of magazine that also publishes long form. And what I have definitely known from the beginning is that you cannot live by long form alone. And so, sadly, I also write for various sort of glossy magazines, do celebrity interviews, which are much quicker to turn around. And so kind of pay the bills while you're kind of working on the longer stuff, which do pay the bills, but more slowly, I guess.
So how many pieces would you be kind of typically juggling at once? And also, how do you organise that? Is there spreadsheets?
No, God, I mean, there should be, shouldn't there? No, clearly I don't have a spreadsheet. I wish I had a good answer to that. And I should have a good answer to that. I'm going to go home and develop a good answer to that, because I basically always have at least 1 or 2, I guess, long reads or long form pieces on the go. And then we'll also simultaneously try and have other quicker stuff on the go. Or at least there'll be kind of dips when I'll sort of suddenly take on loads of work, and to sort of like almost like as a kind of down payment for the time I know I'm going to be spending on a long read. So yeah, it's a slightly chaotic juggle. I don't have a system.
Is it all British, or are you writing for Americans as well?
I've done a little bit for the Americans. I did a profile for the New York Times Magazine of Philip Pullman a little while back. I've done little bits. I did something for the New Yorker website. I'd love to do more for the Americans. It's sort of, and like there are ongoing conversations, let's put it like that. But I feel like at the moment, I guess being on contract and with The Guardian, that sort of dominates a lot of my time, because I have a sort of sense of commitment there, I guess, that needs to be fulfilled. So I don't have a huge amount of capacity, but who knows?
And you do 3 long form pieces for The Guardian a year. Does
Yes.
it take the full 4 months?
I know. I mean, that sounds insane, doesn't it? Like, no. And obviously I have to do a ton of other work, around the sides of that. So it's not like I'm spending 4 full months on them. But it is amazing how long these things take. And I think I do find myself trying to explain, people will ask me, like, it takes you how long? And like, there's sort of note of disbelief when, they're just reading a kind of 5,000 word article about Tampax. It's like, how is it possible that it took you that long? But they just really do take a long time. And a lot of that, again, is the sort of negotiation of access, the process of setting up, and a lot of that is just interviewing then once you've got in there, and reporting, and the sort of smallest part of that is the writing. As I said, it's like that's really the kind of happy coda to the whole process.
It's a rule of the show that we always ask about money. Now, say as much or as little as you're comfortable with. But in terms of how does money interface with your writing life?
How does it interface with my writing life? And that, I mean, I get paid, but I wish I was paid more.
Could we, with this contract you have, being in a contracted position for the long read, does that, and you don't have to go into specifics if you don't want to, but does that mean that your rate per piece is comparable to if you're doing it on a freelance basis, or is it higher or is it lower?
I think it's just comparable. So yeah, I get paid, I guess, across the board. With everyone I sort of write for, between say 50p a word and £1 a word, and the American publications pay more, which is amazing. But yeah, so that's the sort of ballpark, I guess.
Do you ever haggle your fee? Try and negotiate it?
I have done that a couple of times. But not as probably as often as I should. I don't know, it's really tricky. I feel like I should be saying yes, we should be sort of fighting for that all the time, but probably I need to be a bit braver on that.
Do you have an agent, or are you handling all of these negotiations directly yourself?
Yeah, I don't have an agent at the moment. I've sort of talked to a lot of agents over the years, and sort of always come away with the same thought of like, when I've got an idea for a book, I'll I'll come back to you, kind of thing, because
I sort of definitely don't feel like you need an agent for journalism. And I feel like if you, I guess, I don't know what reasons, but haven't ever kind of, have just been really enjoying what I've been doing. And I've had little kids, so I haven't had a huge amount of time to sort of think about books. But I sort of feel like I'm just getting to a point now where I think, okay, I could maybe imagine kind of going deeper into something and working on something for a long time. But I'm just really conscious, you know, I've got a lot of friends who have written non-fiction books, and I know the sort of toll it takes and the amount of work it is, and you really, really have to know you want to do it, I think. And you really, you know, and I'd want to do it well. So, yeah, I've sort of held off on that whole process until I really kind of feel like I've got something I have faith in.
Fair enough. To talk about the Tampax long read that you did for The Guardian, to also put the chatbot comment earlier into some context, you talked about the kind of up-and-coming brands trying to take Tampax's crown. Was that your idea originally?
Yeah, Tampax was my idea, actually. Why did I want to do it? I think so the long read has this thing, they kind of like every now and then doing kind of brand pieces, you know, this thing that's in your cupboard, or like everyone, the supermarket that everyone goes to, or the, I don't know, all you know, the beer that everyone drinks, and to kind of unpick it and unravel it and just tell the story of it a bit. And I guess I was probably just like hunting around for ideas and opened my bathroom cup and I was like, Tampax, that would be good. And having no idea actually at the time when I pitched it that there was this kind of, I just thought Tampax would be a good thing to write about, and wasn't aware of this kind of surge in new tampon brands, which then obviously became part of the story, or the main part of the story in a way. So I don't know, I always find that I often have the same recurring thought process when I'm doing a piece, like, oh, that was lucky, that came out being like that. But I sort of feel like it's more that the lesson is that when you go deep enough into anything, you find a story and you find something really interesting that I've become obsessed with for, 3 months or whatever. And you can kind of turn a lot of things into good stories, I think, if you pay enough attention to them, I suppose.
Just on the money piece, is the last question we'll ask on this, but so back to it slightly. Just, you touched on, the big discrepancy between American and British publications. Yeah. And, a number of people do this kind of work who I've spoken to will say they regard, for it to be sustainable financially, that needs to be where you're working. You need to be writing for those places. And that British work is really valuable and useful, but is a kind of stepping stone to moving in that direction. Do you seem to have a somewhat different approach to it, that you're kind of, this is the market you want to be operating in, or is it just the way it's tended to work out?
It's a really good question. I think, part of the way it's gone for me is just sort of, the sort of practical effects of like, having a contract and fulfilling that. And also, I suppose a decision not to be like that purist about my journalism, and that I don't mind doing like quicker turnaround sort of celebrity profiles. I actually find them really fun and really interesting, because it gives you, they're brilliant for ideas, because you find yourself thrust into mad worlds and fashion shoots and all this sort of things that you otherwise, wouldn't encounter. And yeah, I enjoy doing them. And that sort of, for me, like, is the kind of, as I said before, like, sort of is the thing that financially sustains the sort of British long form, sort of career. But also I'm like a real, and clearly this could happen, in America, but like I am a real believer in the most important part of this whole game just being your relationship with your editors. And I'm very, very lucky, and I have really brilliant editors in the form of David Wolfe at The Guardian and Jonathan Beckman at The Economist. And I don't know, I feel like they're sort of worth their weight in gold, in the sense of having people that have confidence in you, and they've given me a lot of confidence. I think when I started writing full time, freelancing, it took me a while to build up that confidence and to sort of really think I could do this as a career. And there's, I don't know, it's that you can't kind of quantify the value of a sort of close and like trusting relationship with an editor. And I guess that goes back to my earlier point about like having been an editor and knowing how hard it is. And when you find a good one, you just sort of, I want to hold on. And I also feel like my writing gets better and better the longer I write for someone. And you get given more and more freedom as well, and more freedom both in the ideas you do and the way in which you can write them. And I don't know, I guess that all just counts for a lot for me.
I guess also you understand what they're looking for a bit more the more you work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think they bring you, it just becomes a really interesting and like fruitful conversation, and it's really enjoyable. You know, it's like it becomes something much more than that kind of slightly remote sort of pitching ideas and, you know, waiting to hear back and then getting edits back. You know, everything being done on email, which I guess is more the case when if it's someone far away. Like I like being able to go and meet my editors face to face. I like talking to them. And so those things just really sort of matter to me, I guess.
How much do you discuss the kind of structure of a piece before you go away and write it with your editor?
It's a good question. I think I often will we'll I mean, it depends whose idea it is in the first place. That kind of goes back and forth. But we'll often actually, whichever way it goes, I will send an outline. But
before you've done the reporting or after the reporting?
No, before.
So, okay.
Yeah. So an outline of how I kind of see it working out. I mean,
as in a pitch or after the thing's been commissioned, or is this much more like a dialogue you're having with the editor?
Exactly. I guess so. If it's my idea, I do need to kind of, I will write out a pitch still, but like it's, if it's been their idea, I'll kind of go away, think about it, do some research, come up, write an outline, and then how much resemblance that outline bears to the final product is really anyone's guess, though, to be honest. And I often say this to my editors, I'm like, here's a pitch, but like, trust me. And then like, it's really understandable why they don't always trust me, but at the same time, I sort of feel like, I know I can do it. You know, it's that sort of feeling. It's like, I know this has got something in there, and it's sort of hard always to get that in a pitch form.
As we come to the end of the episode almost, I want to talk about the third piece you sent us about domestic violence.
Oh, yeah.
And the case of a woman who had killed her partner.
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that piece? How much access did you get to people? And were they kind of queasy about having a reporter write it? Or were they glad to have someone bring attention to the case?
Yeah, that was such an interesting one and such a different challenge because I never met her and couldn't meet her. She's in prison. So I was all the reporting for that was done on 3 massive like ring binders of documents that I was allowed to access to by her lawyers, and was going to Liverpool, her hometown, and meeting her family and talking to her family a lot. But what felt really important to me was trying to almost get in her head as much as I could, even though I wasn't meeting her. And that was kind of just sort of intellectually and emotionally like a really challenging exercise. And I often sort of wondered whether I was, like ethically, whether that was sort of okay, except that obviously her family were, in answer to your, kind of that part of your question, were absolutely engaged and on board and sharing letters and photos. And, so there was a sort of puzzle effect, I guess, going on of just piecing together all these, different things and people and the kind of emotions that they were feeling. And the narrative, the stories that her friends could tell me about events and things they'd witnessed and seen and about what she is like. And so, and eventually kind of, I guess sort of building up a sense of her in that way and of her story. But it was, a very, very different from anything I'd ever done before in terms of, not having access to your principal subject, basically.
And in terms of your process, I'm really fascinated by this with writers, but do you aim, when you're filing, to file like a clean draft that is ideally the end product, or do you file an outline? Like, what is your process with that, and how does it work with the editor?
I definitely, I would say, file as clean and as finished a thing as I can, but crucially, actually, I guess, not getting it to a point where if anyone messes with it, I'd freak out because that's psychologically a really bad place to get to with a piece, I think, because then you're going to get edited. And I love being edited and I'm open to it and have always benefited from it, from good editing. So, but at the same time, I definitely want to kind of give it my best shot, I guess. So I do a lot of like printouts, you know, I read it through.
Is that even now where you're very established, you've got really good relationships with your editor, you still want to kind of get it pretty polished before you show?
Yeah, okay. Definitely. Yeah, and I'm incapable of filing a piece without like sending a kind of covering caveat-laden email of being like, this is just, I'm still not sure about this bit or that, you know, and but I do really try.
But you get to the point that you feel like you've reached.
I sort of get to the point where there aren't
kind of
any notes on the printout anymore.
But that strikes me as
annotations.
As tactically quite a clever approach, because you're sending something that's quite clean, but you're also in your covering note indicating you're open to change it. Right? That strikes me that you're running an elaborate parallel game.
Yeah, I wish I could like credit myself with such like bluffing and double bluffing. In fact, it's just like a sort of really English kind of inability to do anything without like simultaneously apologizing for it, I think. But yeah.
I think also, I mean, I definitely feel that as like kind of female.
Yeah, that was in my head, and I was like, I'm not going to say it. Don't say it. But
I'm the same. I'm always like, it's something that's not right. I can't put my finger on it.
I know.
And tell me it's crap. I'm sorry.
I know exactly. If I get in there first with the self-criticism, then it's sort of like it's like a defensive thing, isn't it? So that they can't do it for me. And I think I think you're probably right, and that drives me crazy because I don't know. If there's one thing I've learned over all these years, it's like, it takes a while to like build up, it took me a while to sort of build up the confidence to kind of write in the way that I sort of wanted to write, and to have like the faith in myself to do that. And it definitely took the faith of other people to in me to do it. But I don't know, it's something I remember Hilary Mantel actually weirdly full circle back to her saying to like young, her advice always to young writers, it's
be
like,
confident, right?
Back yourself. You've got to back yourself, and it's true.
Well, that seems a really great place to wind this up. So, Sophie, look, thank you for being such a fantastic guest and always take notes, and wishing you best with everything going forward.
Thank you.
Hello, it's us again. Rachel, what was your take on the Sophie bilateral?
I love talking to Sophie. Her writing is beautiful, so it was great to get some insight on how she kind of crafts those pieces. But also she was very honest about having kids and being a freelancer and how you make that work, and I thought that was really refreshing.
Definitely a lot of real talk in that interview, and yeah, I'm also a huge admirer of her work, and we were both conscious just how quickly the interview went. Actually,
flew by.
Not always the case on the podcast, but I could have talked to her for hours.
Now people are going to go back and listen and be like, oh, this one drags.
I could have talked to her for hours about the intricacies of managing editors and being managed by them and that sort of thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And we've had listeners email us and say they want to hear more from freelance writers, so we're glad to tick that box for people.
Indeed we are. This is also now where we ask you bluntly for money, as we've decided to do. So we should explain that the podcast has a crowdfunder on Patreon. It's patreon.com/always take notes. And what do you get, Rachel, if you contribute?
You get a bundle of pitches. To clarify, story pitches, not other varieties like tent pitches. Simon thought we should clear up that.
Football pitches.
Pictures. Anyway, you get a bundle of story pitches to various different outlets. So it gives you a bit of a sense of how you can craft pitches in different ways and still be successful.
And the money you give goes to paying our producer and our social media editor and to buying swanky audio kit. So it's all for a good cause. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acomb.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer is Nicola Keane. Our social media is by Owen Redahan. Our graphic design is by James Edgar. And our score is by Jess Danheiser.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always, on the aforementioned Patreon at Always Take Notes, and if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.